The Life of Nelson Mandela. Part 1. Early Life and Influences. Welcome to another inspiring journey. Today we will learn English and find motivation by diving into the extraordinary life of Nelson Mandela, a man who fought for justice, equality, and freedom. In this first part, we will explore Mandela's early life, the challenges he faced, and the influences that shaped his character. Grab your notebook, listen carefully, and let's begin this story filled with lessons about courage, determination, and hope. A humble beginning in rural South Africa. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village called Mvezo in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His birth name was Rolihlahla Mandela, which means pulling the branch of a tree, or more commonly, troublemaker in the Xhosa language. Little did anyone know that this troublemaker would grow up to challenge one of the most oppressive systems in history. Mandela's father, Gadla Henry Mfakanyiswa, was a local chief and advisor to the Thembu royal family. His mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was a deeply spiritual woman who taught Mandela the values of compassion and humility. Together, they raised their son with a strong sense of cultural pride and moral duty. When Mandela was just 9 years old, his father passed away, leaving the family in financial hardship. Despite this loss, young Nelson learned to be resilient and resourceful, qualities that would define his character later in life. A new name and a world of opportunity. As was customary in many colonial schools at the time, Mandela's teacher gave him an English name, Nelson, on his first day at school. This was a practice aimed at assimilating African children into Western culture, a reality that Mandela later criticized. Still, young Nelson embraced education as a key to opportunity and change. Mandela attended a local mission school and excelled in his studies. He was curious, disciplined, and eager to learn. When he was a teenager, he moved to the royal palace of the Thembu people to live with Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, a prominent figure in the Thembu community. This move came after his mother entrusted him to the chief's care, hoping he would receive a better education and future opportunities. Living in the royal household exposed Mandela to leadership and diplomacy. Chief Jongintaba treated him like a son and provided him with a strong sense of responsibility. Mandela observed how disputes were resolved through dialogue, a lesson that deeply influenced his belief in negotiation and reconciliation. Discovering the power of education. Mandela's formal education began at Clarkberry Boarding Institute, a prestigious school for African students. He was one of the few young men in his village to attend such an institution, and he worked hard to prove himself. Later, he studied at Healdtown, a Wesleyan secondary school known for its emphasis on discipline and academic excellence. It was during this time that Mandela first encountered the idea of social justice. He learned about African leaders who resisted colonial rule and began to question the unfair treatment of his people under South Africa's oppressive racial policies. Mandela was inspired by stories of bravery and defiance, which planted the seeds of activism in his heart. After completing high school, Mandela enrolled at the University of Fort Hare, the only higher education institution for black South Africans at the time. At Fort Hare, he studied law and met students from across the country who shared his ambition for a free and fair society. However, Mandela's time at Fort Hare was cut short when he joined a student protest against the university's policies. This act of defiance led to his expulsion, marking the beginning of his lifelong struggle against injustice. A journey to Johannesburg. After leaving Fort Hare, Mandela returned home, only to find that Chief John Ntaba had arranged a marriage for him. Not ready to settle down, Mandela fled to Johannesburg, South Africa's largest city. There, he worked as a security guard and later as a clerk at a law firm. In Johannesburg, Mandela was exposed to the harsh realities of apartheid, the system of racial segregation that denied black South Africans basic rights. He saw firsthand the exploitation and discrimination faced by his people, fueling his determination to fight for justice. At the same time, Mandela began attending night classes at the University of South Africa, UNISA, to continue his studies in law. Education remained a central part of his life, even as he struggled to make ends meet in the bustling city. Meeting mentors and embracing activism. It was in Johannesburg that Mandela met influential leaders who introduced him to politics. Among them was Walter Sisulu, a respected activist and member of the African National Congress, ANC. Sisulu recognized Mandela's potential and encouraged him to join the ANC, a political organization dedicated to ending apartheid and achieving equality for all South Africans. Under Sisulu's guidance, Mandela learned about the power of collective action and the importance of standing up for one's beliefs. These early years in Johannesburg were transformative, as Mandela began to see himself not just as an individual, but as part of a larger struggle for freedom. Lessons from Mandela's early life. Nelson. Mandela's early life teaches us valuable lessons about perseverance and the importance of education. Despite losing his father at a young age, facing financial challenges, and enduring the injustices of apartheid, Mandela never gave up on his dreams. His journey from a rural village to the vibrant city of Johannesburg is a reminder that our beginnings do not define our potential. Mandela believed that education was the most powerful weapon to change the world. As you listen to his story, take note of the new vocabulary and phrases. Use them to expand your English skills and draw inspiration from Mandela's courage and determination. Part 2. Activism and the Fight Against Apartheid. Welcome back to our journey through the life of Nelson Mandela, a man whose dedication to justice and equality continues to inspire the world. In this part, we will focus on Mandela's rise as an activist and his fight against the oppressive apartheid system in South Africa. As you listen, pay attention to new vocabulary and ideas that will help improve your English and expand your understanding of one of history's greatest leaders. The rise of apartheid in South Africa. In the early 20th century, South Africa was a divided nation. Under British and Afrikaner rule, a system of racial segregation known as apartheid was enforced. Apartheid, meaning apartness in Afrikaans, separated people based on race. Black South Africans, who made up the majority of the population, were denied basic rights such as voting, owning land, or accessing quality education. They were forced to live in poor, overcrowded areas and work in menial jobs for low wages. By the time Mandela moved to Johannesburg, apartheid policies were tightening, and the black population faced increasing oppression. Mandela could no longer ignore the injustice around him. He realized that change would not come unless people stood together to fight against the system. Joining the African National Congress, ANC. In 1942, Mandela officially joined the African National Congress, ANC, a political organization committed to fighting for the rights of black South Africans. At the time, the ANC primarily used peaceful protests and petitions to challenge apartheid laws. Mandela quickly became an active member, attending meetings and learning from senior leaders like Walter Sisulu and Oliver Tambo. Mandela's dedication and leadership skills stood out, and in 1944, he helped establish the ANC Youth League. This group aimed to bring fresh energy and new strategies to the movement. Mandela and his peers believed that direct action, such as strikes and boycotts, was necessary to challenge the government's racist policies. The Defiance Campaign. One of Mandela's first major contributions to the anti-apartheid struggle was his involvement in the Defiance Campaign of 1952. This was the first large-scale, non-violent resistance movement against apartheid. Thousands of people across South Africa protested unjust laws by deliberately disobeying them. For example, protesters entered areas designated for whites only, refused to carry the mandatory passbooks that restricted their movements, and defied curfews. Mandela played a key role in organizing these protests, traveling across the country to mobilize supporters and spread the message of resistance. The Defiance Campaign marked a turning point in South Africa's history. While the government responded with violence and arrests, the movement united people from different backgrounds in a shared fight for freedom. Mandela himself was arrested during the campaign and convicted of statutory communism. But this did not deter him. Instead, it strengthened his resolve to continue the struggle, becoming a lawyer and defending justice. During this time, Mandela was also building a career as a lawyer. In 1952, he and his friend Oliver Tambo opened South Africa's first black-owned law firm in Johannesburg. The firm, Mandela and Tambo Attorneys, provided affordable legal services to black South Africans who were often ignored or mistreated by the judicial system. Mandela's work as a lawyer gave him a first-hand look at the everyday struggles of his people. He defended clients who were unfairly evicted from their homes, unjustly arrested, or denied their rights under apartheid laws. This experience further fueled his passion for justice and reinforced his belief that the legal system needed to change. The Freedom Charter. In 1955, Mandela and other leaders from the ANC and allied organizations drafted the Freedom Charter, a document that outlined their vision for a democratic South Africa. The charter declared that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and called for equal rights, land redistribution, and free education for all. The Freedom Charter became a symbol of hope for millions of oppressed South Africans. However, it also angered the apartheid government, which viewed it as a threat to their power. Mandela and other activists were labeled as traitors and faced increased surveillance and harassment, from nonviolence to armed resistance. As peaceful protests were met with brutal crackdowns, Mandela began to question whether nonviolent methods alone could bring change. In 1960, a tragic event called the Sharpeville Massacre occurred. Police opened fire on unarmed protesters, killing 69 people and wounding many more. This horrific incident shocked the world and marked a turning point in Mandela's approach to the struggle. Mandela realized that the apartheid government would not give up power without a fight. In 1961, he co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, meaning Spear of the Nation, the armed wing of the ANC. MK was formed to carry out acts of sabotage against government infrastructure, such as power plants and communication lines, while avoiding harm to civilians. Mandela believed that armed resistance was a last resort, but he saw no other way to confront a regime that responded to peaceful protests with violence. He said, "It was only when all else had failed, when all channels of peaceful protest were closed, that the decision was made to embark on violent forms of political struggle." Going underground. Mandela's involvement with MK made him a wanted man. To evade arrest, he went underground, disguising himself and moving secretly between safe houses. He became known as the Black Pimpernel because of his ability to elude capture. Despite the dangers, Mandela continued to organize resistance efforts and traveled to other African countries to gain support for the anti-apartheid movement. He also received military training in Ethiopia and Algeria, preparing for the long struggle ahead. Lessons from Mandela's activism. Nelson Mandela's rise as an activist teaches us that standing up for what is right often requires courage and sacrifice. He believed that freedom and equality were worth fighting for, even if it meant risking his own safety. As you learn about Mandela's journey, take note of the vocabulary and phrases used to describe his activism. Think about how these words reflect his determination and the challenges he faced. Part 3. Imprisonment and Perseverance. Welcome back. In this part of Nelson Mandela's incredible journey, we will dive into the years when he was imprisoned, his determination to continue the fight against apartheid, and how he became a global symbol of resistance. As you listen, pay attention to new vocabulary and expressions that will improve your English and inspire you with Mandela's strength and resilience. Mandela's arrest and the Rivonia trial. By the early 1960s, Mandela's involvement in the armed struggle against apartheid made him a target of the South African government. In 1962, he was arrested for leaving the country without permission and inciting workers to strike. However, it was his role in organizing sabotage efforts through Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, that led to the most significant moment in his life, the Rivonia trial. In 1963, Mandela was arrested again, this time at Liliesleaf Farm in Rivonia, where ANC leaders had been meeting. He, along with several other members of MK, was charged with sabotage and attempting to overthrow the government. At the Rivonia trial in 1964, Mandela faced the possibility of the death penalty. During the trial, Mandela delivered a powerful speech from the dock. He declared that he was not sorry for his actions and that he was willing to die for the cause of freedom and justice. Mandela's words captured the hearts of millions of people around the world. He said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities." Sentenced to life in prison. On June 12, 1964, Mandela and his fellow defendants were found guilty of sabotage and sentenced to life imprisonment. Although he was not sentenced to death, the ruling was still devastating. He was sent to Robben Island, a remote prison off the coast of Cape Town, where he would spend 18 of the 27 years of his imprisonment. Robben Island was notorious for its harsh conditions. The prisoners were forced to do hard labor, breaking rocks in the hot sun, and were kept in small, damp cells. Despite these unbearable conditions, Mandela remained determined to continue his fight against apartheid. Even in prison, he was a leader, organizing discussions, reading books, and writing letters. He believed that education and self-improvement were essential to his struggle. Life on Robben Island. Life on Robben Island was not easy for Mandela. The prisoners were treated with cruelty by the guards. They were denied basic comforts and had limited access to visitors or letters. Mandela's family, especially his mother and children, were not allowed to visit him for many years. This separation caused him great pain, but he found solace in his comrades. They shared stories, studied together, and supported one another. Despite the oppression, Mandela's spirit remained unbroken. He kept a positive outlook, knowing that his cause was just and that the fight for freedom was bigger than his personal suffering. He once said, "I am not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." The global campaign for Mandela's release. As Mandela's imprisonment continued, his name became known around the world. People across the globe began to protest for his release, demanding an end to apartheid. The Free Nelson Mandela campaign became a powerful movement, with millions of people organizing rallies, boycotts, and petitions to pressure the South African government. Many countries imposed economic sanctions on South Africa, and international artists, such as musicians, used their platforms to raise awareness. The world could not ignore the injustice Mandela faced. His imprisonment became a symbol of the fight for freedom and equality. Mandela's letters and writings. During his years on Robben Island, Mandela continued to communicate with the outside world, especially through letters. His letters, which were often smuggled out of prison, became an important tool in raising awareness about the plight of South Africa's black population. Mandela's writings expressed his belief in forgiveness, unity, and the importance of dialogue. One of the most important aspects of his philosophy was that the struggle for freedom was not just for black South Africans, but for everyone who believed in justice. Mandela wrote, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way. But I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. Even while imprisoned, Mandela was preparing for a future in which apartheid no longer existed. He studied political theory, history, and law, strengthening his mind and developing his vision for a peaceful and democratic South Africa. The beginning of change. In the 1980s, the political landscape in South Africa began to shift. The apartheid government was under increasing pressure, both from within the country and from the international community. Mandela's name became a rallying cry for anti-apartheid activists, and his release was seen as an essential step toward ending apartheid. In 1985, the South African government offered Mandela conditional release if he renounced the use of violence. Mandela refused, stating that he could not abandon the cause for which he had spent so many years in prison. He insisted that the conditions for his release be tied to the dismantling of apartheid and the establishment of democracy. By the end of the 1980s, the government was facing massive internal resistance, economic sanctions, and international condemnation. The apartheid system was beginning to crumble, and it was clear that change was coming. Mandela's release and the end of apartheid. Finally, in 1990, after 27 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island. His release was a momentous event, signaling the end of apartheid's grip on South Africa. Mandela was greeted by thousands of cheering supporters, and his walk to freedom was broadcast around the world. Mandela's release marked the beginning of a new era for South Africa. The negotiations for a peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy were difficult. But Mandela's commitment to reconciliation and peace helped guide the country through this challenging period. He continued to stress the importance of unity and forgiveness, believing that South Africa could not heal if it remained divided by anger and resentment. Lessons from Mandela's imprisonment. Mandela's years of imprisonment teach us several important lessons. First, they show the power of perseverance. No matter how difficult the struggle, Mandela never gave up on his belief in justice and equality. Second, his time in prison highlights the importance of education and self-improvement. Even in the harshest conditions, Mandela continued to grow intellectually and spiritually, preparing for the day when he would finally be able to lead South Africa to freedom. Lastly, Mandela's imprisonment shows the strength of the human spirit. Despite being treated inhumanely, he remained committed to his cause, finding ways to inspire others even from behind bars. His story proves that even in the face of great adversity, we can maintain hope and work toward a better future. Part 4. Leadership and the Road to Peace. Welcome back to our journey through the life of Nelson Mandela. In this part, we'll explore his role as the first black president of South Africa and his efforts to unite the country after the end of apartheid. Mandela's leadership, wisdom, and determination were crucial in helping South Africa heal from years of racial division and injustice. As you listen, pay close attention to the vocabulary and phrases that relate to leadership, reconciliation, and peace. Concepts that are essential not only for understanding Mandela's impact, but also for improving your English. Mandela's release and the end of apartheid. In 1990, when Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison, South Africa was at a turning point. The apartheid system, which had oppressed black South Africans for decades, was crumbling. There was tension and fear about what would happen next. Many wondered if the country would fall into chaos or civil war. However, Mandela's release offered hope for a peaceful transition. The South African government, led by then-President F.W. de Klerk, recognized that the apartheid system was no longer sustainable. They began to negotiate with Mandela and the African National Congress, ANC, to work toward a new democratic South Africa. The process was challenging with many obstacles, but Mandela's leadership played a critical role in guiding the country through this period of change. The importance of reconciliation. One of Mandela's most remarkable qualities was his commitment to reconciliation. After years of imprisonment and suffering, he could have sought revenge against those who had oppressed him and his people. But Mandela understood that true peace could not be built on hatred and division. His focus was on creating a future where all South Africans, regardless of their race or background, could live together in harmony. Mandela's calls for forgiveness were sometimes seen as controversial. Many black South Africans wanted to see justice for the crimes committed under apartheid. However, Mandela believed that focusing on the past would only hinder progress. He once said, "Reconciliation does not mean forgetting or trying to bury the pain of conflict. It means working together to build a new future." In 1993, Mandela and de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their work in dismantling apartheid and creating a peaceful transition to democracy. This recognition was not just for Mandela's achievements, but for the courage of both leaders in seeking peace rather than revenge. The 1994 elections and Mandela's presidency. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic elections in which all citizens, regardless of race, could vote. For the first time, black South Africans were given the right to choose their leaders. Nelson Mandela, as the leader of the ANC, was a candidate for the presidency. His campaign was based on hope, unity, and the promise of a new South Africa free from the divisions of the past. On April 27, 1994, Nelson Mandela was elected President of South Africa. His election was a moment of celebration for millions of South Africans and a symbol of triumph over apartheid. Mandela, at the age of 75, became the first black president of the country. As president, Mandela faced immense challenges. South Africa was a nation deeply divided by years of racial hatred and inequality. The economy was struggling, and the country was facing high levels of crime and unemployment. Despite these challenges, Mandela remained committed to building a democratic, inclusive society. His leadership style was characterized by humility, wisdom, and a willingness to listen to others. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission. One of Mandela's key initiatives during his presidency was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. The TRC was established to address the human rights violations that occurred during apartheid. It gave victims of apartheid the opportunity to share their stories and seek justice, while also allowing those who had committed crimes to come forward and ask for forgiveness. The TRC was an important step toward healing the wounds of the past. Mandela understood that forgiveness and accountability were both necessary for reconciliation. He knew that it was not enough to simply punish the perpetrators of apartheid. It was crucial to create a space where victims could be heard and where the country could move forward together. The TRC was led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who shared Mandela's belief in the power of forgiveness. Through the work of the Commission, many South Africans were able to come to terms with the atrocities of apartheid and begin the difficult work of rebuilding their country. Mandela's focus on education and social change. During his presidency, Mandela emphasized the importance of education and social change. He believed that the future of South Africa depended on providing quality education to all citizens, especially the black population, who had been denied access to good schooling under apartheid. Mandela worked to improve the education system, although the challenges were immense. The legacy of apartheid had left many schools in poor conditions, and teachers were often undertrained. However, Mandela's government invested in education, building new schools, and providing scholarships for young people to study both in South Africa and abroad. Mandela also worked to address the deep social and economic inequalities that existed in the country. He launched initiatives aimed at improving health care, reducing poverty, and providing housing for the poor. His government worked hard to tackle the effects of apartheid's legacy, even though progress was slow. Mandela's legacy and impact on the world. Nelson Mandela's presidency marked the beginning of a new era for South Africa. Under his leadership, the country took significant steps toward racial reconciliation and social justice. However, Mandela's impact extended far beyond South Africa's borders. He became a global symbol of peace, justice, and the power of forgiveness. Mandela's ability to forgive and reconcile with his oppressors made him a respected figure worldwide. He showed that it was possible to overcome the divisions of the past and build a better future. His leadership inspired countless people around the world to fight for justice, equality, and human rights. Mandela also became a voice for global issues, such as the fight against HIV, AIDS, poverty, and the importance of environmental protection. He continued to speak out for justice and equality, even after stepping down from the presidency in 1999. His legacy continues to inspire leaders, activists, and everyday people who are working for a better, more just world. The end of Mandela's presidency and retirement. In 1999, after serving one term as president, Nelson Mandela stepped down from office. He chose not to run for re-election, believing that South Africa needed fresh leadership to continue the work of building a democratic society. After his presidency, Mandela focused on peace and humanitarian work, both in South Africa and internationally. He founded the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which works to promote social justice, human rights, and education. Mandela also continued to speak out on global issues, using his influence to advocate for peace and the protection of human dignity. Although he officially retired from politics, Mandela remained a beloved figure in South Africa and around the world. He was often sought after for his wisdom and guidance, and his legacy continued to shape South Africa's future. Lessons from Mandela's leadership. Nelson Mandela's leadership teaches us many important lessons. First, he showed that true leadership is about service to others. He put the needs of the people above his own, working tirelessly to create a better country for all South Africans. Mandela's focus on reconciliation and forgiveness also offers a powerful lesson. He understood that healing could only happen if people were willing to forgive and work together, no matter how painful the past had been. Finally, Mandela's example reminds us of the importance of perseverance. Even in the face of unimaginable hardships, he never gave up on his dream of a free and equal South Africa. His life is a testament to the power of determination and hope. Part 5. Legacy and Global Impact. In this final part of our series on Nelson Mandela, we'll reflect on the lasting impact of his life and leadership, both in South Africa and around the world. After stepping down as president in 1999, Mandela's influence continued to resonate globally, and his commitment to peace, justice, and reconciliation never wavered. He remained a symbol of hope, not only for South Africa, but for people around the world who struggle for equality and human rights. Nelson Mandela's global advocacy for human rights. After retiring from politics, Mandela focused on promoting human rights across the globe. He spoke out against injustices in countries like Sudan, Zimbabwe, and Myanmar, and continued to advocate for peace and social justice in Africa and beyond. He used his fame and influence to draw attention to issues like poverty, HIV/AIDS, and the rights of women and children. One of Mandela's most important initiatives in his later years was his involvement in the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. South Africa had been severely affected by the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and Mandela used his platform to raise awareness and reduce the stigma surrounding the disease. He worked with global organizations to provide treatment and education for those affected by HIV/AIDS, particularly in Africa. Mandela also became a prominent advocate for peace in the Middle East, urging leaders to seek diplomatic solutions rather than conflict. His calls for peace, human rights, and justice were universal, and he remained a tireless voice for those who had no voice. Mandela's continued role in South Africa's development. Even after stepping down as president, Mandela remained an influential figure in South Africa's development. He continued to encourage the government to address the country's social and economic challenges. Although the country had made significant progress, inequality remained widespread, especially in terms of wealth, education, and health care. Mandela's role in addressing these issues was critical. He regularly met with government leaders, urging them to focus on reducing poverty and improving the living conditions of Black South Africans who were still affected by apartheid's legacy. His dedication to equality and justice remained unwavering, and his leadership continued to shape the direction of the country. The legacy of forgiveness and reconciliation. One of Mandela's most enduring legacies is his emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation. After spending 27 years in prison, he could have chosen anger and revenge, but instead, he chose a path of healing. His example has influenced leaders and peace movements around the world, showing that reconciliation is often the key to overcoming long-standing conflicts. Mandela's focus on forgiveness and building a united South Africa helped to avoid the kind of civil war that many feared after apartheid ended. Instead, the country was able to peacefully transition from a system of racial segregation to a multiracial democracy, thanks to Mandela's ability to inspire people to look beyond their differences. Nelson Mandela's legacy in education. Mandela believed that education was the key to unlocking the potential of individuals and nations. Even after his presidency, he continued to advocate for quality education for all South Africans. He founded the Nelson Mandela Foundation to focus on education, and he worked closely with organizations that aim to improve schooling and provide opportunities for young people. Mandela's impact on education went beyond South Africa. He advocated for global educational initiatives, believing that education could help lift people out of poverty and create a more peaceful and just world. He once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Nelson Mandela, a symbol of hope. Nelson Mandela's life story is a powerful example of what one person can achieve through determination, humility, and a commitment to justice. His journey from a young law student to a revolutionary leader to a president and global symbol of peace shows that anyone, regardless of their background, can make a difference in the world. Mandela's legacy goes beyond politics. He became a symbol of hope for oppressed people everywhere. His message of unity, forgiveness, and perseverance continues to inspire generations. His work in South Africa helped to bring an end to apartheid and laid the foundation for a more inclusive, democratic society. His work around the world has shown us that even the most difficult problems can be solved with the right kind of leadership and vision. Mandela's passing and the world's mourning. Nelson Mandela passed away on December 5, 2013, at the age of 95. His death was a deeply emotional moment for South Africa and the world. People from all walks of life gathered to honor his memory, and his funeral was attended by leaders from every corner of the globe. Mandela's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy lives on. He was remembered not only as a leader, but as a man who dedicated his life to the betterment of others. Tributes poured in from world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens, all praising his role in shaping a better world. He had become a beacon of hope and an enduring symbol of the power of forgiveness. Nelson Mandela's impact on future generations. Nelson Mandela's life and work continue to inspire new generations of activists, politicians, and individuals working toward social justice. His principles of equality, respect for human rights, and the importance of reconciliation are as relevant today as they were during his time. Mandela's legacy also continues to influence global discussions on race, inequality, and human rights. As long as these issues remain, Mandela's teachings will serve as a guiding light for those who seek to create a fairer, more just world. His life proves that one person can bring about profound change, and that we all have the ability to make a difference. Conclusion. Lessons from Mandela's life for all of us. Mandela's life teaches us many valuable lessons. He showed us that leadership is about service to others and that it's possible to forgive even the deepest injustices. His dedication to justice, equality, and reconciliation has left a permanent mark on the world. Mandela's story is a reminder that no matter the challenges we face, we all have the potential to change the world for the better. His life encourages us to act with courage, to stand up for what is right, and to never give up even when the road ahead seems difficult. As you continue to learn English, let Mandela's example guide you. Be persistent, stay focused on your goals, and use your abilities to make a positive impact on the world. In doing so, you will honor his memory and contribute to the ongoing journey toward a more just and peaceful world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Nelson Mandela. Keep learning, keep growing, and remember that the power to change the world lies within you. This concludes our series on Nelson Mandela. We hope you found inspiration in his life story and that it has helped you learn more English along the way. Continue your language journey and strive to make the world a better place, just as Mandela did.